Fear is normal. Fear is often useful. If we didn't feel fear, we'd walk into traffic without looking or try to stroke a lion. We might even jump off a building or step into the ring with a heavyweight boxer. In dangerous situations, fear works well to protect us. When we feel threatened, it's rational and reasonable to also feel fear. That's because the real purpose of fear is to ensure that we survive. Our brains are hardwired for fear. It's an evolutionary instinct designed to protect us. And yet, in modern times, our survival is rarely threatened in the same way as it was in the past. Thankfully for most of us, our personal safety is no longer threatened on a daily basis. We're not running for our lives in the wild anymore. So what do we do now that causes fear to kick in? We might be walking down the street holding our handbag close because we fear it could be stolen from us. Fear makes us choose to walk down the main road at night rather than a dark alley. But both those fear-based choices are reasonable and useful. The trouble is that humans also have the mixed blessing of anticipation. Fear can make us anticipate terrible things in our mind. We might dwell on things that we've read or seen on TV. A fear of flying is a great example. Thankfully, most of us never experience a plane crash, but that doesn't stop many people from experiencing high anxiety when they fly. We can feel sick with nerves because we anticipate the worst. No matter how unlikely, flying is in fact the safest form of transport. Just being fearful of something can provoke the same response as actually experiencing it. And don't forget that fear can be very exciting for some people. Why else do people enjoy horror movies? Horror fans actually enjoy being afraid. They get pleasure from a hormone like adrenaline, which triggers our fight or flight response. In fact, our top 10 fears are surprisingly common, and they're not all rational. They include things like fear of public speaking or spiders. These days, our daily fears tend to revolve around common things like paying bills, delivering presentations, job interviews, redundancy, and maybe relationships. But if we accept that fear is a normal part of life, we must also accept that it's never going to disappear completely. Most of the things we fear don't really threaten our survival when we weigh them up rationally. Instead, anticipation makes us fear the worst, no matter how unlikely it is. Anticipation magnifies fear inside of us, which has a knock-on effect. Our fear gets inflated by automatic responses in our bodies. Our hands shake, we get sweaty palms, we get knots in our stomach, and we release adrenaline. Then we find ourselves in a self-perpetuating loop, a vicious circle that can be really hard to break. Many fears center on our thoughts about the future. Our anticipating minds cause us to fear things that aren't happening right now, or in fact, may never happen. Fear and anxiety is often more to do with the anticipation of a future threat, rather than what's happening to you right now. I spend most of my time these days speaking at conferences. Sometimes it's just a handful of people, sometimes it's thousands. And public speaking is ranked as most people's number one fear. But what's the real danger here? Our physical safety? Our survival isn't threatened by public speaking. Instead, our fear is really about anticipating messing it all up or looking stupid. And although this fear feels very real, in fact, it can hold you back from doing the things that you need to do to succeed. Once you enter this loop of spiraling anxiety and anticipation, you can become overwhelmed by fear. And that fear then drives you to avoid perfectly harmless situations that make you feel frightened or anxious. It's hard to break this cycle, but there are things you can try. Let me tell you a little story. I've done loads of things in my life that have scared me. I've been a rally driver, a boxer, a mountaineer. I've entered numerous hardcore fitness competitions and challenges. And in 2026, I'm going to be rowing the Atlantic Ocean. I've been homeless, broke, alone. I've been married, divorced. All these things have scared me. I feel like I've practiced feeling fear so much that I've become a little bit accustomed to it. When you get accustomed to something, it doesn't feel quite so terrifying anymore. What I did to overcome my fear was to expose myself to it often. I embrace uncertainty, and I've done it in ways, whatever the outcome might be. So no matter what happened, I tell myself, I'm only going to win, because even in the very worst case scenario, I'm going to learn something. And I love learning stuff. You might feel scared, but if you never try, you're never going to learn. You won't grow, and you certainly won't change. That's why it might help you to identify the real cause of your fear. It's important because there's probably a hidden emotional fear hiding behind a practical task. One of my favourite words of wisdom says that if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Once you know your fear, you can take baby steps to confront it. Gently, slowly, you can increase your exposure to this thing that you fear and eventually face it head on. You'll discover probably that it's not as bad as you anticipated. Keep up the momentum, regularly confront your fear and move forward just a little bit every time. And as the author Susan Jeffers suggested in the title of her very famous book, feel that fear and do it anyway.